She knew something was wrong the moment the front door creaked open on its own. The call that brought her here had come from inside the house, 3 hours after the entire family had already been reported missing. And nothing about it made sense. Not the timing, not the silence, not the uneasy weight that settled in her chest as she stood outside the gate staring at a house that looked perfectly ordinary, yet felt deeply wrong, as if something beneath its surface was watching her back. The street around her only made it worse. It was too quiet, stripped of the usual signs of life. No passing cars, no neighbors on their porches, not even the distant sound of a dog. Just an unnatural stillness that made every small sound feel too sharp, too loud. Especially the slow, reluctant creak of the front door opening wider, as if the house itself was breathing and inviting her in. Sarah tightened her grip on her phone, the flashlight trembling slightly as she raised it toward the entrance. Her breath came unevenly as she stood there, every instinct telling her to turn around and leave, to forget the call, the report, everything that had led her here. But something deeper, harder to explain, pulled her forward anyway. One careful step at a time, she crossed the gravel path. Each crunch beneath her shoes seemed to echo too loudly in the silence, her heartbeat rising until it filled her ears. At the porch, she hesitated, sensing that something irreversible waited just beyond that threshold. Still, before she could stop herself, she whispered a faint, "Hello," into the dark and stepped inside. The air inside felt wrong immediately, stale and heavy, carrying a metallic undertone that made her stomach tighten. She lifted her hand instinctively toward her nose as her eyes adjusted to the dim light. The living room, at first glance, seemed untouched. Furniture stood neatly in place, and a television flickered softly, playing a children's cartoon that felt disturbingly out of place in a house so empty and silent. But as her light lowered, that illusion broke. Faint, uneven marks stretched across the floor, subtle disturbances that suggested something had been moved through the room slowly and deliberately, guiding her attention toward the hallway. Her chest tightened as she followed them, her steps becoming slower, more cautious, until she reached the narrow passage where the darkness seemed thicker, almost absorbing what little light she brought with her. She stopped at the edge of it, her hand shaking as she raised her phone higher. The beam flickered, unstable, as if even it didn't want to go further. And then she heard it a whisper, soft and distant, but undeniably real, slipping out of the darkness ahead, like someone breathing too close to her ear, and she spun around instantly, her heart racing as she pointed the light back toward the living room. But nothing was there, no movement, no sound, just the same eerie stillness. And yet the whisper didn't stop. It shifted, moving ahead of her now, deeper into the hallway as if guiding her, calling her forward, and she swallowed hard, forcing herself to speak again, louder this time, asking if anyone was there, but the only answer she got was silence, followed by a soft creak from upstairs, a single step echoing faintly through the house, and then another, slow and uneven, like someone was walking but not quite right, and every part of her body told her to run at that moment, to leave before it was too late, but her legs refused to move backward, instead carrying her forward into the hallway as if she had already made the decision long before she realized it. And the deeper she went, the colder the air became, the walls feeling closer, the shadows stretching longer, and then she saw it at the end of the hallway, a door slightly open, just enough to reveal darkness inside, and something pale lying on the floor just outside it, and her steps slowed as she approached, her breathing almost stopping, as her light finally reached it fully, revealing a hand, human, lifeless, positioned in a way that didn't look natural, like it had been placed there carefully, and Sarah's vision blurred slightly as fear tightened around her chest. But she couldn't stop now, not when she was this close, so with trembling fingers she pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. And the moment she did, her entire world shattered because the room was wrong in a way she couldn't explain. Not chaotic like a normal crime scene, but controlled, arranged, intentional. The father sitting upright against the wall with his eyes wide open, staring into nothing, his expression frozen in a silent scream that never came out. The mother lying on the bed with her arms stretched forward, as if she had tried to crawl away or reach for help that never arrived. And the boy sitting in the corner facing the wall, completely still, too still, like he had been placed there and told not to move. And Sarah felt her body go numb as she took in the scene, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing because it didn't feel real. It felt staged, like someone had taken the time to position them this way, and that thought alone made her stomach twist even tighter. But then her light shifted upward and landed on the wall behind them, and everything inside her seemed to stop completely, because written across it in large, uneven letters made from dried blood were the words, "You came back," and her mind couldn't understand it, couldn't make sense of why it was written, or who it was meant for, because she had never been here before, never seen this house, never met this family, and yet something about those words felt personal, like they were meant for her specifically. And as that realization began to settle, her phone suddenly buzzed in her hand, the sound loud and sharp in the silence, making her flinch as she looked down at the screen to see the same unknown number calling again. And her fingers hesitated for a second before she answered, bringing the phone slowly to her ear as she whispered a quiet hello. But instead of a response, there was only silence, followed by a faint, static sound, and then a voice, low and close and unmistakably real, whispering words that made her blood run cold, telling her she wasn't supposed to find them yet. And Sarah's eyes widened instantly, because the voice didn't sound like it was coming from the phone at all. It sounded like it was right behind her, inside the room, and her body locked in place as she slowly turned toward the doorway, expecting to see someone standing there. But it was empty, completely empty. And yet, the feeling of being watched grew stronger, heavier, pressing down on her from all sides. And then she noticed something on the floor that hadn't been there before, wet footprints appearing one after another, as if something invisible was walking away from her, step by step forming in real time, leading out of the room and into the hallway, and her breath caught in her throat as she watched them, unable to move, unable to think, until suddenly she heard a soft movement behind her again, and with a sharp turn, she looked back toward the corner where the boy had been sitting, and her heart nearly stopped because he was no longer facing the wall, his head slightly turned now, just enough for one eye to be visible, open and staring directly at her. And that single moment broke whatever control she had left, as she finally screamed and ran, turning and sprinting down the hallway as fast as she could, not caring about the noise, not caring about anything except getting out, her footsteps echoing loudly as she rushed toward the front door, the whisper growing louder behind her, almost chasing her. And just as she reached the exit, the door slammed shut on its own with a force that shook the entire frame, causing her to stumble as she struggled to pull it open, her hands slipping against the handle before it finally gave way, and she burst outside into the cold night air, collapsing onto the ground as she gasped for breath, her entire body shaking uncontrollably as the reality of what she had just seen began to crash over her. And within seconds, the flashing lights of police cars filled the street, officers rushing toward her asking questions she couldn't answer, her voice barely working as she tried to warn them that something was still inside, something that shouldn't be there. And although they didn't fully understand her fear at first, they entered the house anyway, weapons drawn and lights raised. But when they came back out moments later, their expressions had changed completely, their confidence gone, replaced by something much darker, something uncertain, because what they had found inside didn't match her story at all, not even slightly, because the bodies she had just seen were no longer in the room, and somehow, impossibly, they had been moved again. The police sealed the house within minutes, but the atmosphere outside felt just as heavy as inside, like whatever lived in that place wasn't contained by walls, and Sarah sat in the back of the ambulance wrapped in a thin blanket that did nothing to stop the cold crawling through her body, her eyes locked on the house as if she expected it to move, to breathe, to react to what had just happened. And when the first officers came out, their faces told a story no report ever could. Pale, tense, disturbed in a way that made it clear something was very wrong, and one of them kept repeating under his breath that the bodies had moved, that they were not where they were supposed to be. And what happened next changed everything, because when the investigators went back in to confirm, they found the scene completely altered. The father, now lying near the entrance, as if dragged across the floor after Sarah had left. The mother no longer on the bed, but halfway into the hallway with her arm twisted unnaturally. And the boy, the one Sarah saw in the corner, was gone without any trace. No blood, no footprints leading out. Nothing to explain how a lifeless body could simply disappear. And that single detail shifted the entire investigation from a standard homicide into something far more disturbing, something none of them were trained to handle. And they immediately began documenting everything, setting up cameras in every corner of the house, placing sensors, recording every possible angle, because if anything moved again, they needed proof, real evidence that could not be explained away. And for a few hours, everything remained still, too still, like the house was waiting. And then at exactly the same time Sarah had entered earlier, 2:13 inches the morning, the cameras captured something that made every officer watching the feed fall silent. The front door slowly opening by itself, without any visible force, the hinges moving with that same slow, unnatural creak Sarah had described. And then inside the hallway camera, the shadows began to stretch across the walls, long, distorted shapes that didn't match any object in the room, moving independently as if they were alive. And one of the technicians leaned closer to the screen, zooming in as his hands trembled slightly, and that's when they saw it, at the far end of the hallway, a figure standing completely still, tall and unnaturally thin, its head tilted at an angle no human could hold, its outline flickering like the camera itself couldn't process it properly, and no one spoke because no one knew what they were looking at, and then suddenly it moved, not walking but gliding forward in a way that felt wrong on every level, coming closer to the camera with slow, deliberate motion until the screen flickered violently and the image broke into static, and for a single frame, just one, something like a face appeared. Not clear enough to identify, but enough to know it wasn't human, and then every camera in the house went dark at the exact same moment, cutting all visual contact instantly. And inside the house, the officers froze as their radios crackled with confusion, one of them whispering that something was inside with them, something they couldn't see. And before anyone could respond, a sound echoed from upstairs, soft at first but unmistakable, a child's laugh, faint but clear enough to send a chill through everyone present, and 2 officers were sent to check it out despite the hesitation in their movements, climbing the stairs slowly with their weapons drawn as each step creaked loudly beneath their weight. And when they reached the top, the hallway was empty, the doors closed, the silence heavy again. But then one of the doors slowly opened on its own just a few inches, revealing nothing but darkness inside. And one officer called out asking if anyone was there, but received no answer, only that same suffocating quiet. And with a deep breath, he pushed the door open fully and stepped inside, immediately freezing in place as his partner followed and stopped behind him. Because the room was not empty at all, the walls were completely covered in drawings, hundreds of them, crude and childlike but detailed in a disturbing way, each one showing the same house, the same rooms, the same family, but always with one extra figure present, tall and dark, standing somewhere in the background, watching. And as they moved closer, they noticed something even more unsettling. The figure in the drawings was getting closer in each one, starting far away in the earliest sketches and gradually moving nearer until in the final drawing it stood directly beside the boy, its arm reaching toward him, and beneath that last drawing was a date written in shaky handwriting, today's date, which made no sense because that meant it had been drawn recently, possibly while they were already inside the house, And as that realization settled in the air shifted suddenly, the door behind them slamming shut with a force that made both officers jump, and when they rushed to open it, they found it locked from the outside, the handle refusing to move no matter how hard they pulled. And then they heard it, a whisper right behind them, so close it felt like breath against their necks, telling them that the boy was not gone, and slowly they turned back toward the room, toward the wall of drawings, and that's when they saw him, standing in the corner where there had been nothing just seconds before, the boy, pale, still, his eyes wide and fixed on them, and a faint smile forming on his face as he spoke softly, telling them they had come back, and before either of them could react, the lights flickered violently and went out completely, plunging the room into total darkness, and downstairs the rest of the team heard the sudden noise, followed by a brief scream that cut off too quickly, and when they forced their way into the room minutes later, it was empty, no officers, no boy, no sign of struggle, just the drawings on the wall, and one new addition that hadn't been there before, a fresh drawing still wet as if it had just been made, showing two men standing inside the room with the same tall figure behind them, closer than ever, and written beneath it in uneven letters were the words that confirmed their worst fear, that now they were part of it. And outside the house, Sarah sat silently, her breathing steadier now, but her expression different, distant, as if something inside her was shifting, because fragments of memory were starting to surface, brief flashes she couldn't fully understand, but couldn't ignore either. Images of the same hallway, the same basement, the same whisper calling her name, and for the first time since arriving she felt something stronger than fear, recognition, like she had seen this place before long ago, and as that thought settled her phone vibrated again in her hand, the same unknown number appearing on the screen, and this time she didn't hesitate. She answered immediately, her expression slowly changing as the voice spoke, not with fear, but with something colder, something darker, because this time she knew that voice, and somewhere deep inside her mind, it knew her too. By morning, the house no longer felt like a place under investigation, but something far worse, something avoided even by those trained to face danger, and the officers who remained on scene spoke less, moved slower, and kept glancing at the windows like they expected something to look back at them, while Sarah stood across the street unmoving, her eyes fixed on the same doorway she had run from hours earlier, because deep inside her mind, something was shifting, something long buried, beginning to surface piece by piece, and what happened next changed everything. Because when the investigators finally dug into the history of the property, they uncovered records that had been ignored for years, files that told a pattern too precise to be coincidence. 4 families over the past 2 decades, all living in the same house, all disappearing under mysterious circumstances. No signs of forced entry, no evidence left behind, just absence, complete and unexplained until now. And as they cross-referenced names and reports, one detail froze the entire room. A name that appeared in the earliest file, a missing child report from 22 years ago, tied directly to that same address, Sarah Malik. Reported missing, never found, case eventually closed without answers. And the silence that followed that discovery was heavy because it changed Sarah from a witness into something else entirely, something far more connected to the house than anyone had realized. And when they brought her in and showed her the file, her reaction confirmed their worst suspicions. Her hands began to shake uncontrollably, her breathing uneven, as if her body recognized the truth before her mind could accept it, and then the memories came, not slowly, but all at once, violent flashes that forced their way to the surface, the hallway darker than it should be, the basement door always closed, the sound of whispers calling her name in the night, and the figure always there, always watching from just beyond the edge of sight, getting closer each time she turned away, and she whispered quietly that it doesn't let you leave, her voice distant as if she was speaking from somewhere else. And when they asked her what she meant, she didn't answer directly because she was remembering something worse. Something that shattered the idea of a simple crime, because the families had not just disappeared, they had been taken, slowly drawn into something inside the house, something that watched them, studied them, and eventually claimed them. And the most disturbing part was that it didn't act alone. It needed a connection, someone who could move between the outside world and whatever existed inside those walls, someone who had already been there once and survived, someone like her. And that realization made everything fall into place. The phone call that brought her there was not random. It was a trigger, a signal designed to bring her back, because she had never truly escaped. She had only been released, allowed to leave so she could return when the time was right. And when that truth fully settled something inside, Sarah changed. The fear that had controlled her since the beginning, slowly fading into something colder, something more understanding. And later that night, without telling anyone, she went back to the house alone, the street just as silent as before, the air just as heavy. And as she stepped onto the porch, the door opened again without hesitation, almost as if it had been waiting specifically for her. And this time she did not pause, did not question. She simply walked inside, her movements calm, deliberate, as if she was returning to a place she already knew, and the smell of blood still lingered, but it no longer made her recoil. The darkness no longer felt threatening, but familiar, and the hallway stretched ahead of her exactly as she remembered from the fragments in her mind. And the whisper returned, clearer now, no longer distant, but surrounding her completely, welcoming her back, telling her that she remembers now, and she nodded slightly as she moved deeper into the house, toward the basement where the door stood open, waiting. And as she stepped down, each creak of the stairs echoed like something counting her arrival, and at the bottom she saw them, not as lifeless bodies, but as something in between, the families who had disappeared, standing together in silence, their eyes empty, yet aware, watching her without expression. And behind them stood the figure, no longer hidden by shadows, tall and unnatural, its shape clearer than before, yet still wrong, in ways the human mind struggled to process, its head tilting slowly as if studying her reaction. And when it spoke, its voice carried multiple tones at once, layered and distorted, telling her that she had brought them back, and tears formed in her eyes, not from fear, but from realization, as she asked quietly if she had ever truly left. And the figure's answer was simple. She was never meant to. And in that moment, everything became clear. The house did not just take people. It fed on them. It existed through them. And she was part of that process. Not a victim, but a bridge. The one who connects the outside world to whatever lives inside. And instead of resisting, she stepped forward, accepting what she had become, because deep down she understood there was no other choice. And the next morning, when the police returned for what they thought would be another routine search, they found the house completely empty. Once again, no bodies, no evidence, no Sarah, nothing to suggest anyone had been there at all, except for one detail that could not be ignored. A message written on the wall in fresh, dark letters, still wet as if it had just been placed there, stating clearly that she will bring more. And despite further investigation, the case was eventually closed due to lack of evidence, filed away like the others before it, another mystery without answers. But far from that place, in a quiet neighborhood where nothing seemed out of the ordinary, a phone began to ring, the sound cutting through the silence of an otherwise normal evening, and a woman looked down at the unknown number on her screen, hesitating for just a moment before answering, unaware that her decision would change everything. And on the other end of the line, a calm, familiar voice spoke softly, asking her to come check on something. And without knowing why, she agreed, because no one ever refuses the first time. And somewhere, in the distance, a door slowly began to open again, waiting, ready, just like before. And the most terrifying truth is that the next time it opens, it might be for you.